Welcome to the Neijiaquan podcast. This is Isaac. This is episode 3 of season 2. Today we are going to be talking about Jin Yunting, the Xingyi master and teacher of Liu Hung Chieh. We'll also be talking about the next Nei Gong practice, which is moving energy along specific lines. And as a special bonus, at the end of the episode is a chunk of an interview we did with Frank Allen that's available in its entirety on our Patreon. It's 3 parts, almost 2 hours long. So check that out. Frank talks about his initial meeting with Bruce Francis and many, many other things in the longer interview. So check that out. There's also other interviews we did, discussions, practice sessions, things like that. Okay, hope you enjoy the episode, and thanks for listening.
Welcome back to the Neijiaquan podcast with Isaac and Jess. Here in season 2, we've been talking about an older generation of martial arts teachers that we've been learning about and profiling and sort of digging into the history that we can find. This episode, we want to talk about Jin Yunting, who is one of the Xingyi teachers of Liu Hung Chieh. So Jin Yunting is quite an amazing person in the martial arts world. He's born in 1881, so I think that makes him the older than Liu Hung Chieh by about 20 years, so make him a senior above him. As far as we can tell from the books we've found, they got together somewhere in the 1920s, we think. And so Jin Yunting has a book that he published that was translated by John Groschwitz into English as the Xingyi Boxing Manual. And there's a biography there of teacher Jin Yunting. There's not too many other places to talk about him. His style seems to be kind of quiet. Isaac, it seems like this book is almost the only place we've seen his name.
Yeah, the first place I heard about him was in a Bagua Journal article about the Li Sunyi Chen Tinghua connection issue, and he's listed as one of Xiang Shang's students, but that's it. Just nothing just about him, just the name in a list of names. And then when John's book came out, it was like, oh my God, that's the guy. And it didn't. I had actually found pictures of him, I think, before the book came out, but then the book came out and it was like, oh, there he is. There he is.
Yeah, so he must have been a pretty prominent guy to have a book published. I think there's something to that.
It wasn't cheap to have pictures taken. It wasn't cheap to publish a book. So, there was somebody was interested in what he was doing, but he's not, he's not one of those big name people that is well known necessarily.
Right. Yeah. For some reason, the schools that follow him,
at least not in the West. But even now with the internet and, a lot more access to Chinese text and stuff, still haven't found much about him. So
let's jump into the biography of Jin Yunting from the Xingyi Boxing Manual. It says here that at age 12, Jin arrived at the capital, where he first began studying Xingyiquan. This boxing is divided into 5 postures called splitting, smashing, drilling, pounding, and crossing. They possess the blending of hard and soft and the subtlety of the mutual creation of the 5 elements. At the time, masters Shang Yunxiang and Sun Lutong used their boxing to instruct disciples, and Master Jin entered into their schools. So there it talks about his teachers, who are 2 very famous figures in Xingyi.
Yeah.
And so clearly he's from a lineage of top people. I mean, that's what I take away from this here.
Yeah, as I understand it, he studied with Shang first and then went to continue with Sun Lutong. But
it says here that he continued to study other martial arts as well. He continued to practice for another 10 years, and during this time he received Li Sunyi's secret instruction, which advanced his learning, solidified his strength, and made famous his reputation. So that's yet another huge figure in 20th century Xingyi. Right. This great, single saber Li, famous bodyguard from the Boxer Rebellion.
Which would have been his grand teacher, right?
His own grand teacher.
Right.
He went and learned from him and learned some secret and advanced instruction. So, wow, so he got to train with his own grand teacher, which is pretty cool.
I don't know if people know this, but grand means like grand as in grandfather, it's not grand as in like fantastic, just in case anyone's wondering.
Great grandfather, right.
Right.
That's like in Chinese martial arts, it's like a family relationship.
Yeah.
So there's your father and your grandfather and so
But
on.
somebody can be a grand, teacher and not be very good also, it doesn't mean
exactly.
like it doesn't,
It's an age thing.
Anyways.
So a few more things about Jin Yunting. It says here he was served as a martial arts instructor for 15 military divisions.
Wow.
Because of this, his art flourished among the people of the North. Seeing the changing political situation, the corruption of the military, and recognizing the coming chaos, Master escaped to the south one year. So it sounds like he's part of the Kuomintang Nationalist Army, teaching in multiple military divisions, and so that helped increase his number of students.
Which kind of would explain why he was well known.
And I wonder if that's the same time when teacher Liu Hung Chieh was serving in that same military.
Could be.
Yeah, I wonder.
And it's interesting because, like, in the book, there's also a bunch of bios by military guys. So maybe I'm wondering if those were his, guys.
Okay,
served with or something, because they don't really sound like they were his Xingyi classmates necessarily.
Right. So there's sort of the Xingyi that's taught in the bodyguard and civilian circles. Then it goes into this military. I guess life is so militarized in China at that time, you really have no choice. If your martial arts going to be doing anything, it has to be.
Well, I mean,
fighting.
If you believe the legends, right? It started as a military art, right?
True,
with
right.
Yue Fei training his soldiers and whatnot. So
right here, you come full circle.
I guess it. And then there was which who knows if we'll talk about that one sometime. But that Huang Bonan had doesn't he have that Xingyi for
bayonet?
Bayonet, yeah, exactly. So Xingyi applies well to military fighting. It's it seems.
Definitely, it seems like it pops up there repeatedly. So next he's in Shanghai. Those in Shanghai of brave bearing who esteemed boxing presented gifts and sought instruction until his doorsteps were thronged. And Master was forced to select those to admit, not squandering his teachings on the rash or corrupt. That sounds like he's a somewhat picky teacher, not of high class.
Yeah, that's another one of these
high morality.
These themes that pops up, right? That I think it was one of the Tai Chi guys we talked about saying, that it's for a certain class of people, right? That you don't want to teach just this to just anyone. So I think this is that same sort of thing, that keep out the riffraff,
Right. Now something about Master Jin Yunting himself. His appearance was handsome and strong, his mind gentle. He conducted himself as a teacher with respect and made friends with sincerity. In regard to weapons, he became adept at one after another and was especially skilled in straight sword arts. So it sounds like he was doing the Xingyi sword, which I've never trained. That sounds pretty cool, the two-edged longsword.
Yeah.
After the Capital Martial Arts Institute was established, Sun Ludong summoned him to work there. However, Master Jin viewed his own art as only a minor achievement, and the risk of jealousy was too great, so he gracefully declined. So it sounds like after his military service, the Capital Martial Arts Institute was established. I wonder if that's one of those civilian martial art societies that were forming since the turn of the century.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
Is that related to maybe the Esteeming the Martial Society that we've run across a few times?
I would have to assume he was at least somewhat connected to it, as both of his teachers were part of it. So yeah, but I don't know to what degree.
Right.
I know Li Kengyi was sort of the, he was like kind of like godfather of that whole thing. So
wherever his name pops up, that tells you there's some connection there.
Yeah, and I think there were two groups, right? There was the one in Beijing and one somewhere else. So
Tianjin, yeah.
Yeah, right. So I think the Beijing one was more the Shang Yongsheng's group.
Well, we're going to keep investigating these martial arts associations that were internal martial arts groups we're gathering, because there's something about that I think is at the core of this lineage, of the stuff that came
For sure.
to the West. There's a link there,
Definitely.
All right, so here's a few last things from Jin Yunting's book. Master's teaching was rational, taking my weakened body and stiff limbs and patiently correcting them without forcing or exhausting, slowly and imperceptibly changing my fearful and complacent heart, attaining the eradication of sickness and extension of life, leading me to today become a teacher myself. So this is all being written by a guy who's profiling Jin Yunting.
Right.
As to his conduct, in friendship he was superior with penetrating purity, unyielding force, and disdain for fame and fortune. All those so-called men and idealists today, do they possess these qualities? I'd say he's a rare breed, man, this upstanding guy with the great lineage who's...
Yeah, I mean,
he's teaching at the highest level, military, fighting a foreign invader. I mean, that's pretty high praise.
Yeah, and the sort of the thing about not wanting to be, well known, even though you're already well known, seems to be, there's the humility is a big part of it, right? So whenever you write about your teacher, it's their amazing humility is always part of it.
Mm-hmm. That's a big deal in Chinese martial arts for sure.
Right. I mean, and it sounds like this guy was,
so many,
pretty humble, and that I think is rare that you find an actual, humble person as opposed to someone.
This guy might have been legit.
who's yeah, and also I think it sounds like he was serious, that what he was doing was really about teaching the art and spreading the sort of the gospel of Xingyi, if you will, and even to the degree that it as a health practice, right? That one of the themes you hear a lot of these testimonials sort of talk about is how they start. I mean, you can almost make an outline, right? They all start basically with, I was weak, as a child, I got sick or something, and then I did fill in the blank martial art, and then I wasn't weak anymore, and that's the standard sort of resume goes like that, So I think that that just shows that people were getting into internal martial arts even back then as a health practice, not necessarily to fight in war, even though these guys probably were, a lot of them at least were fighting in war.
Yeah,
sounds like.
So I mean, you can see he covers so much a comprehensive way. Martial arts can be applied to so many different levels. He's teaching military drills, he's helping weak people get strong, and he's also an upstanding citizen of great honor and virtue. So I mean, that's that fully faceted thing that Chinese martial arts has always been known for. All right, one last thing. Pulling from the Shenwu website, a post from 2001, this is the only fight story we could find about Jin Yunting. It says here that a different master by the name of Cao Lian Feng became famous in Shanghai as a young man when he worked as a security guard with his Xingyiquan teacher Jin Yunting. They got into a fight with a group of gangsters and managed to beat them all while unharmed. This was fairly big news at the time. Yeah. So at least he got, I mean, that's the only, all we hear about is what a great guy he is and how kind and nice he is. But here he's in a big battle with a gang of gangsters and beat them all while unarmed. Pretty impressive.
Yeah. It's a good story.
So moving on to the next of the Nei Gong principles is moving qi along general directions of various channels in the body. So going up and down, left and right, the body's various natural flows. You're going to participate in that and move along with those flows and engender strength, and strengthen those flows and harmonize with those flows. They're already there, but you're going to get involved with them and improve them, basically. That's how I see it.
Yes, one of the main types of Qigong is Qigong where you move energy along meridians, right? Energy meridians. So essentially it's working the way acupuncture needles work. And this is often done by moving your hand, right? So if just taking your hand and moving it in a certain pattern over your body, and that directs the flow of energy through a certain channel. So there's often a very specific hand movement for each channel, right? My teacher, Bruce, uses a set called Dragon and Tiger to teach this type of thing, and each one of the movements is using a different one of these channels. And essentially the basic principle is that you have a field of energy, and if your hand, it moves around in that field, that connects to the channel inside your body. And this is essentially, it's like doing a car wash, right? It's like it's not trying to go real deep and affect things, way inside the body. It's just moving energy on these surface lines, which sort of clears out the gunk, and then the body functions better. So it's a very like get the body working, get things healthy is the main focus.
It seems like optimizing it rather than transforming and rebuilding and changing anything. You're trying to engender what's already there and strengthen that and get into the groove with how the system's working.
And power is not a big thing. So like the thing with some of the Nei Gong stuff, like we talked about last season, that a lot of that's about developing internal power, right? When you're working on this level, especially for health, it's not really about power. It's about function, right? It's about getting everything to be healthy first, and then it can be, you can turn it into a exercise for developing power. But the first stage is just make the body healthy by increasing the flow of qi through these these surface energy lines.
You optimize how things are already working and improve them and find any glitches and gaps. That's kind of the low-hanging fruit of the Qigong world, where if you have a habitual kink or something, getting that out will improve your system without having to do anything. It's just energy that's trapped right now. That's a big part of the opening the energy gates that we were talking about last season, of just mining what's trapped and locked up and freeing that. Then looking for more from there.
Right, this is almost even before you would do something like opening the energy gates, because opening the energy gates, your mind, your sense of feeling is the main vehicle. With something like this, the movement is the main vehicle, right? So the movement creates a pattern which opens up that channel, and
so eventually you build the sensitivity that later you can really dissolve. But first you kind of got to feel it, go with it. Then the dissolving becomes an option. Yeah,
this is like, if you were going to take energy gates, this would be more about like the scanning portion of the dissolving, but you'd be doing it with a physical movement more than just a intent.
That reminds me of how the third Bagua palm change is the one where you actively sort of open up your hands and sweep them across your arms, especially at the end where the arms don't actually touch. You just draw across each other. That's that energy field movement that it seems to be describing here.
Yeah, so the idea is that you have these meridians, right? And there are sort of parallels inside the body and outside the body. So the first one, you can sort of connect to it with your hand being about a fist distance away from the body. So as somebody, well, let's talk about a solo thing first. When you're doing any kind of solo movement and your hand sort of moves up your arm, there are a lot of movements in Tai Chi that do this. There's a ton of movements in Bagua that do this. A lot of what that is as your hand moves past your other arm, for example, to do a chopping motion or something, it's connecting these meridians and just getting those flows going. not necessarily the focus of what you're doing at that time, maybe because, if there's someone trying to attack you, you don't necessarily want to be thinking about chi flows. But
Right.
when you practice by yourself, you might notice that, oh, if I sort of feel this particular line in my arm as I move, it connects to something in my back or my internal organs or some other deeper thing inside your body. So, but the more applicable thing is then it eventually gives you the ability to feel this energy in someone else, either for martial arts or for healing, and that gives you this awareness, sensitivity to what sometimes gets referred to as the etheric field, and that you can very subtly manipulate someone else's energy just by moving your hand past their body. Now, it's not going to be some big thing where they go flying across the room. It's at best going to move them maybe a quarter of an inch, but that's a lot in martial arts.
Right.
And more, probably more useful for most people is more the health side of it, which is if you have something that hurts and you move your hand back and forth, it might feel better. If someone else is in pain, you can, put your hand over that spot, and they might feel it get a little bit warmer, and that's what we're talking about. It's just that, moving energy along those surface meridians.
So principle number 2 about these descending channels, lateral connecting channels, this isn't quite the level of mentally working with this energy and trying to direct it personally. It's more like discovering it, uncovering it, and experiencing it, how it's working, and helping it work better, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it's a quote unquote beginner practice, right? Because it doesn't require that you have a shit ton of awareness or sensitivity to chi, for example, right? That to do some of the later stuff, you actually have to be able to feel what's going on. If you're just trying to move energy with your hand, just kind of running it up and down your arm, it's going to move whether or not you necessarily feel it or not, right? And so the advantage of doing these type of meridian, surface energy, qigong, whatever you want to call it, is that it doesn't require a great deal of preparatory practice to get something out of it, right? And so, just by moving your arms in a simple pattern, you can start to open up these things, which then give you, that gives you the awareness, right? And then you can move on to the more internal practices of moving energy with your intent, which is the next one on the list, right? So it kind of just picks up from there.
Good discussion.
All right,
Talk to you
man.
soon.
Take care. Hey, folks. Isaac here. I hope you enjoyed the episode. As promised, here's a clip from our interview with Frank Allen that's available on our Patreon. Also on our Patreon is other interviews and discussions and lessons and other things related to the podcast. So check it out and like and subscribe. Let us know what you think of the podcast. Okay, here we go. Thanks.
So what time did Kumar come on the scene and you started getting into it with him?
Well, in late 75, we'd been doing a year with BP Chan.
Huh.
And all of a sudden, one day, he walks into Jan's store, which I said people working there with Jan Lang, Jan Stacy, and me. And he walks in, and all of a sudden, he's there. And Lang's a little nervous because their relationship was back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And after doing a little bit of visiting, at one point, he says to Lang, he says, well, I'm going to start some classes, which happened after Jan and Cooper, for a year since they met Chan, were going, if we could get Mr. Chan and Bruce together, get them to go out to dinner, can you imagine what we would learn? Just listening to those two, can you imagine what we'd learn? Bruce came back. They set up the dinner. Bruce and Chan talked in Mandarin all night. They had no idea what they said.
Oh.
The students are trying to
Oh,
get the
man.
info, you know. You got to follow it by hook or by crook, you know.
Yep, they spoke in Mandarin. They had no idea what they said, but apparently it filtered back to us. And one of the things, Chan in his humility said, "Oh, your lineage is much better than mine. Why don't you
Oh,
stay and
boy.
teach these boys?"
Oh,
And Bruce
boy.
said, "Nah, I'm not going to stay here." And then a week and a half later, started his classes. But when he decided to start classes, he went to Jan and said, "Jan, I want you to help me start my classes." And Jan goes, "Well, I'm really busy, and I got all this going on. Frank's got time. He'll do it." So, so I was donated to Bruce to help him with whatever he needed to start his classes. And then I think we sort of gained respect for each other. I think you guys have heard this story before. In Chinese New Year's Eve, 1976, Year of the Dragon. And Jan has gone to visit his kids at his ex-wife's house in Jersey. And Christopher's mother and Christopher's off probably at errands. And Lori and I are watching Jan's store for him. And Bruce has just been back a little while. It's Chinese New Year's. He doesn't know where to go per se. And so he goes to visit Jan, but Jan isn't there. I am. And so we're hanging out, we're talking. And I got one of the only two compliments I ever got from him in the, like 30 years I trained from him that night when he had me show him his Qigong. Following him around, helping him set up his classes, I'd seen numerous people show him Qigong, and he'd always said one or two things. He either said, "That's Shaolin," or he said, "That's complete crap." And that's all he had said. And I showed him the Qigong that I learned from O'Mara. And he said, "I wouldn't teach that to beginners," which I figured was the biggest compliment
Yeah.
I was ever going to get from him.
Yeah.
It was
All right.
the only other one I got was when he read my article on Taoism. Was the biggest compliment he could ever give when he said, "I couldn't have written that better myself."
Ah. So when
So that
when
night
he,
Uh,
oh, go on.
night he decides that he's going to show me the difference in martial arts. So I call my friend John from around the corner, who was a cowboy from Bakersfield. I mean, he left Bakersfield when you could still wear your gun openly on your hip in
Wow.
Bakersfield.
Oh, shit.
And when they took him away from his father, his parents were split up, and they took him away from his father because his father was drop dead handsome. I mean, when his father came out for his wedding, I had to yank my wife back because she's, like, his father was that handsome, and women loved him. And apparently, at one point, some guy had come in and threatened Alistair and told him that he was having an affair with his wife. And Alistair was like, "I never paid any attention to her, but if he's that pissed off, she must really like me." So he not only has an affair with her, but she leaves her husband and son and moves in with Alistair and John, which resulted in the two fathers and sons, whenever their pickup trucks would pass on the road outside of town, would pull over, jump behind the trucks, and shoot at each other for a while before
Oh, my
they drove
God.
on. And the cop broke him up at one time and said, "Well, you can't keep a teenage son if you're doing this." So they sent Jonathan to live with his mother in San Francisco. She was living on the Haight. It was late spring 1968.
Oh, boy.
So he went from being in a shooting feud with his father to
Oh,
dropping acid
shit.
with his mom and her friends.
Out of the frying pan.
Wow.
And then eventually they moved to New York, and he was doing some karate with Chaka Zulu. Still the best karate guy I've ever laid eyes on. But he's out in California somewhere now, still teaching at over 80.
Wow.
But he's one of the guys that got soft and naturally internal as he went along. But he was studying with Zulu, and I always wanted him to get into the Chinese martial arts. So I said, "Let me get my friend." So I called John, and John comes over, and John and Lori are watching. Well, Bruce goes through for the next about 2 hours. He shows us 5 styles of karate, 4 styles of Shaolin, Taiji, Bagua, Xingyi. He shows it all by going, "Attack me, Frank." I attack him. I either bounce off the wall or hit the floor or go flying backwards.
Oh, man.
And he stops and explains exactly what he did, what style it's from, what technique it was, and then says,
Wow.
"Attack me, Frank."
Uh,
And we went on like that for a couple hours.
Hey, folks, hope you enjoyed that. Again, if you want to hear the entirety of the interview, go to our Patreon. You can get to it through our website, the Neijiaquan podcast.com. All right, thanks for listening, and take care.